Good morning, Brilliant Health community. Welcome to this month's Facebook Live event of Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives from the Lifescape Makeshift Kitchen. My name is Dana Bosselman. I'm the integrative and functional dietitian here at the clinic. And this is one of my favorite things to do when I get to step away from the computer and the research articles and the clinical work and just step into the kitchen and translate all of that science into art and have a little fun with the community as we go along. For those of you who have seen the recipe in advance, you know what we're making today. It's actually got a lot of moving parts, but it's worth it, and the aromas coming from all these fresh herbs and garlic are really fantastic this morning. But before I get started and give a few people a chance to jump in if they're joining us live, I wanted to share an experience like I always do before each class starts, just to set the tone and help us arrive. I know that I have been running around this morning, maybe you have as well, and it does seem kind of like that with this wind and very different sort of weather for us, which reminds us that it is the perfect time to make soup. But before we dive into that, I wanted to share that experience I had with you this morning, and that was walking with my Australian Shepherd, Bodhi. And we were walking along what I call the nature path by my house. It's a stretch of unpaved dirt that follows the wash and full of vegetation and wildlife. And as I was thinking and pondering and not necessarily being that present, I'll be honest with you, I looked up and saw a bobcat streak across the path and jump down into the wash, which did capture my attention and brought me straight into the present. And I bent down to look to see if it had passed all the way through, and it had turned around and was looking right at us. And what I did is I dropped down into a submissive position and did a gratitude prayer directly to that beautiful creature that graced our morning. And fortunately, that was the end of the interaction. But when I came home, I looked up the symbolism of having a bobcat cross your path. And some of you may already have thought about that or have been thinking along those lines. But it was interesting because when you see a bobcat, it can symbolize that there's a greater focus on balance and awareness in your life, where you're looking at balancing strategy and intellect with playfulness and merriment. So it really is symbolic of a time for contemplation and introspection. And that was especially pertinent to me this morning, and I thought it was valid. So that may be something that you can take a little gem from my experience and take it and use it in your own life. So with that being said, let's jump into the soup recipe. This is from one of my new favorite food blog sites called Love and Lemons. And if you pop on there at any point, you'll see they have really beautiful content, lots of videos, very easy to follow. And it really does, it seems like all of the food I've seen so far is really fitting along that whole food guideline, making things from scratch but not too complicated, and using a whole diverse array of ingredients. So that's Love and Lemons if you want to look up this recipe directly on that site or see what else they've got going on and experiment that way. I know there's nothing that can spice up your kitchen life a little bit better than something new to make. So this is a vegan soup recipe, and unless you wanted to use some chicken stock, or you could make it vegetable stock or just water, but we are moving towards more of a plant-based paradigm at Lifescape, and that doesn't mean you can't have meat. It just means that we want you to be mindful of the quality of meat you have and how frequently and the portion size. So this soup could be made in advance, and then you could add some proteins to it over the course of the time that you're enjoying it, but it doesn't have to be so. It's a complete protein soup as we go. So the recipe asks you to start off making something called, it's sort of called a umami blend, if you will, and it's really easy and it's so worth it. And what you do is you take 2 tablespoons of miso paste, and this is a living food. It's fermented soybeans This particular brand is a white miso. There's also red miso, and there's blends of miso too. And in Japan, I understand there's maybe, you know, up to even hundreds of different blends of miso. It's such a regular condiment and inclusion in that diet and that culture. So miso is really good for our guts and the bacteria in our guts. It brings in some natural probiotics, and when a food is fermented, it helps with digestion and absorption of nutrients. And miso is rich in manganese, copper, zinc. It also has protein because it's made from beans. So it's a complete protein food. I don't recommend eating the miso straight because it's very tangy and not appealing just as a, you know, out of the container sort of thing. But you can use it in the soup recipe like we're going to today, or you can mix it into butter, marinades or nut butters and make salad dressings or sauces for vegetables. Or you can just take a few tablespoons and warm it up lightly in some warm water and bring it to a gentle heat, not a boil, because if you boil live foods, you kill the culture. But you can do that just for a quick cup of soup any time of day. So once you open it, you want to keep it refrigerated and sealed. This particular brand came with a little paper piece on top of parchment paper. Don't throw that out. You want to keep it on there because it can help keep the miso from oxidizing and keep it fresh. And one of these containers in the refrigerator can last up to a year. I would hope you'd use it before then, but it has a long life because it's fermented. It just kind of keeps itself safe. So I wanted to just take a pause and talk about that specifically because I know a lot of people aren't familiar with miso. Don't be afraid to use it. And this is really, I do recommend getting the white one. This was at Sprouts in the refrigerated section by the yogurts. And the reason why is the white miso tends to be a little more sweet, not quite so heavy. It's a lighter flavor. And also one thing to take note of too is a lot of times miso will have the reason there's so many varieties is they'll add different things to it, like rice or barley or hemp or buckwheat. So for some of my people, those are foods that you're avoiding for various reasons. So just read the ingredient label and make sure that you have a good product for your nutritional needs. So with that being said, you take the miso and then you take some raw unsalted cashews, and it's a 1/4 cup, and you throw that into the blender, and then you also add some non-dairy milk. And this recipe calls for almond milk, so just look for an unsweetened non-dairy milk. If you're avoiding almonds for any reason, or people you're making the soup are, then you can experiment. There's many other varieties, oat milk, pea milk. I don't know if I'd use coconut milk in this particular instance. There's rice milk. Lots of different options for you. So when you put that together in the blender and warm it up onto, get the speed going, and then you'll end up with this product, which I ended up doing it advanced just to save us the effort and the noise. But look how beautiful and creamy this is. It looks like dressing, and actually it probably could be a dressing or a marinade or added to a cooked vegetable dish. But we're going to add this to our soup after we've cooked all the vegetables and bring that umami, which is, as I mentioned earlier, it's that fifth taste. It's that extra layer that we get. We have sweet, sour, salty, and then you also have that umami. And that's really what we taste, and we're not sure what it is, but we know that it really just adds this depth of flavor and deliciousness. So you'll find that in this soup. And I see a question about fermented foods. The question is this standard for all fermented foods? And I'm not sure about the vegetables per se, but I would say that yes, fermented food has a really long shelf life if it's stored properly, because it's by nature just something that gets better and better as it ages. So it might become sharper in flavor, but the probiotic population will just continue thriving. So good question, thank you. Let's get started on the cooking part. So I'm using an induction cooktop, which means that the pan has to have a magnetic bond with the stove. So these two things are in harmony with each other. And that's how we like to cook, right? In harmony with each other. And so I'm letting this warm up, and it does warm up very, very quickly. And I'm keeping it on a lower to moderate heat. We're going to use olive oil in this recipe. And you want to be careful not to heat your olive oil too fast, too hot, too soon. So I always recommend warming up your cooking pot first, and then testing it with a splash of water if you've left it for a bit and you're not sure how hot it's become, and then pouring in your oil. That way, if you throw some water on with your fingertips and it sizzles and evaporates, it's probably too hot for olive oil. So you want to give it a chance to cool off a little bit. This one I'm pretty familiar with, so we're going to go ahead and just put in the oil. I'm sure it's already coming up to a nice temperature. It calls for a couple tablespoons of oil for this recipe. And just, don't be afraid of fat. Good quality fats enhance the fat-soluble vitamin absorption of the food. They lend to more satiety, better mouthfeel, less desire to snack on things like cookies, crackers, chips later on in the day. So go ahead and use a good quality olive oil. This is an organic, extra virgin olive oil from Sprouts. And so I'm just putting enough oil in the bottom to coat the bottom of the pan. And then the next thing we're going to do is add the hard, crunchy vegetables that need to cook a little bit longer. So as you can see here, I've got chopped up, and this is all organic produce. I always try to get organic for myself and for the cooking demo, because we really believe that, or I believe that organic food helps lower your total toxic burden, your body burden, and that can help reduce your inflammation load. So lots of good reasons to go that route. And so I'm just going to go ahead and slide these. This is chopped up celery and scallions, the whites and the green parts. And you can use those both. The white parts are a little more, are stronger. I guess a little more like a traditional onion that you think of. But there's benefits to using both. So I'm just going to slide that over there. And right away we've got a sizzle. You can hear that through the microphone. And I always put in the onions and the celery first, the hard vegetables that need a little more time to get cooked so that they're soft. Nothing desirable about a soup with crunchy vegetables in it. Those two textures don't go together like we would want. So giving that a few minutes. And then the next thing we're going to do is add in, it says carrot, and as those of you who know me well, I like to sneak in other things. And this is a parsnip, which is a cousin of the carrot. And parsnips have a little higher nutrient density, or different, and something that we don't find in our daily diets as often. And it's a big white looking carrot, essentially. So this is all finely chopped up. And this is going to take a little more time to cook too, so I'm going to add that as well. And I've been experimenting recently with different root vegetables. I've been cooking with parsnips, rutabagas, turnips, kohlrabi, anything that I can find in the root vegetable department, and roasting them on a tray. I've been adding them to other soup recipes. I've been shredding them and making salad toppers. So maybe play around with some different forms of familiar vegetables, and they add a lot of flavor and pizzazz to your meals. So give it a go. That's the parsnip. And then the next thing that we want to look at is the mushrooms. And I don't know if there were a bunch of you going to make this recipe, but when I went to the store, the cremini mushrooms were completely gone. So either everybody knows how great they are, or they didn't have a lot in stock. But I looked up the alternative, and this is a baby bella mushroom, very similar to the cremini. And mushrooms are one of the few vegetables that actually have some vitamin D in them, which we're all looking for on a constant basis. Even though we live in a sunny state, many of our patients need a little vitamin D help. So mushrooms are worthwhile. So that's going to go in next on top of those crunchy, sizzling veggies. And as I was cutting all the ingredients up, it occurred to me that making soup is very meditative, that you have this chance to just roll with a knife, to breathe, to listen to great music, to listen to a book on tape, or I'm taping myself a book on, listen to a book, whatever is on, I don't know, on your phone. And just sink into a little space of knowing that you're nurturing yourself, you're giving yourself some self-care, some time to create food that's not only going to be for that particular day, but you can use for multiple days moving forward. And I'll share with you the lentil soup I made recently with the root vegetables and the yumminess, fresh ginger. I'm very grateful for, because I've been going to be eating that all week at various times. So I'm just going to give it a bit of a stir as it continues to simmer and cook. And then I want to give you a word of caution about the sea salt. You certainly can add that, but I would actually wait to add it until the end, because miso is by nature very salty, and I think it'll end up bringing up that flavor nicely. And if it doesn't, then at that point I would suggest adding some more salt once you've tasted it. But as you all know, it's hard to take away salt once you put it in. However, now that I say that, with that being said, I did learn a tip from a really great culinary chef, Rebecca Katz, and she said if you put too much salt in accidentally, then the way to rectify that is to add more citrus. So you could add some fresh squeezed lemon juice, and it actually does work. It helps cut the salt considerably. So if that's something that you end up doing and not realizing how salty the miso is, just fall back on the lemon for a little bit of help. Okay, so now that that's cooking, it says to cook for about 5 to 10 minutes. Just use your judgment. And because there are so many ingredients in this soup recipe, nothing complex, but there are quite a few moving parts, I recommend chopping everything meditatively and calmly in advance, and then just having your own cooking show where you just slowly add things. Because I've seen in the past when people are making a new recipe, they feel stressed and anxious because they're not sure exactly what the food is going to turn out like, and they're not sure what they're supposed to be doing, and the stove is on, and next thing the stove is running you and you're not running the stove. So if you have everything pre-chopped in little ramekins, then you will be in charge and you will have a lot more fun making your meal. So now that this is cooking pretty nicely, I'm going to go ahead and add the garlic. And the reason you don't want to add the garlic right away, because it burns very quickly, and once garlic is burned, it tastes horrible. So don't do that to your sweet garlic. And you can use one of these tubes, they're silicone with a little grip inside, and you slide your garlic clove in here and just put a little gentle pressure, enough to break the skin, and then turn it like this, and out comes the garlic clove without the skin on it. And it's easy to chop. And I recommend chopping your garlic a little in advance, because the air helps it oxidize a little bit, and this is a positive thing, and it allows the garlic to become better, the oils to come out. So I'm just taking the garlic right now, and I'm scooping it off my mat, my cooking board, and using the knife like a pro here, and dropping it into the pan. And you'll know right away, as garlic will start smelling fantastic. And just watch your heat in case your stove gets too hot on you. So I've got that mixed in now. And then the next thing is adding the spices. And so I'm just quickly checking my recipe. We want to add also the beans, and these cannellini beans were another ingredient that was completely wiped out in the grocery store. So I just went ahead and shifted gears, pivoted, and found these little beautiful organic, low sodium, Great Northern white beans. Any kind of bean will work fine. If you want to use a different variety, that's fine too. Oh, I'm sorry, that was another thing that was in this mixture, the miso mixture, a little bit of those white beans. So I'm now adding the beans to the soup and letting that start to simmer in. And then the next piece is to add the fresh herbs. And I do recommend, these were easy to find. This is a rosemary, and this is the fresh thyme, little bits escaping out the side. And a friend of mine recently shared with me that she is growing an herb garden in her backyard in a raised bed. And she has every variety of herb I've ever thought of. And it's really fantastic to go and just pick your own fresh herbs. Dr. Wilder has actually experimented with growing herbs in a water environment, and she's had great success with that too. So lots of ways to do it, or just to go to the store and find your own container like this. So now I'm adding the fresh rosemary, and I don't know if you can see, I've got it chopped up, really diced fine. So you have to peel the leaves off of the rosemary plant, and it's just, their aromatic is amazing. And then you chop it up, chop, 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 chop. And what I was thinking when I was chopping is take your knife and hold down the front of the blade and then rock it like this. Don't do it like this. If you hear this pounding sound, then you're not using the knife properly and getting the best effort. So you want to, this is a chef tip I've learned, is you hold the edge and then go back and forth, and then do not scrape the knife on the cutting board. That dulls the blade really badly. So turn it over and then gather your pile up, back over, chop, chop, chop. And it's more fun to do that, and you'll feel like a pro. And then you can just scoop the herbs up and drop them in your pot. Okay, and then the next thing that we're gonna add is thyme, and this is kind of cool. It's a thyme bundle, and so we're gonna get the essence of the thyme without actually peeling all of the leaves off, which takes a long time. And you wanna wrap this in obviously a friendly material, and this is a all-natural dental floss. So if you want to use something like that, which is designed to be in our mouths and be safe, you can look into that, but don't get the waxed variety, get an unwaxed one. So I'm adding in my thyme bundle into that mixture, and then we're ready to start adding the liquid. So I'm going to add some chicken broth, and this is chicken stock, which is a little richer than just a plain broth, and it's unsalted because I want to control the salt. I want to make sure that it's the right kind of salt, that it's not just a commercially created salt, and that also my recipe has its own seasonings and flavors. I don't want the salt to become the only flavor going on here. So I'm just, I don't think you can see this exactly, but it's coming into the pot, and I will attempt to hold the pot up for you here in just a second. And you can also use water like the recipe calls for. Either way is fine. And now we have something real going on here, which is always exciting. And I'll hold this up so you can see. I don't think you can see that very well, but this is a really beautiful looking soulful soup. And recently one of my patients who's working on removing some inflammatory foods for them, one of which being eggs, said to me, "Gosh, Dana, without eggs in the morning, I'm really struggling with what to eat." And I said, "What about soup?" I said, "You could make a pot of soup and eat it cold or warm it up, and it's really satisfying to hold, even if it's just a mug that you warm up and you hold the mug. You could even sip from the mug, or if it's a soup like this with the veggies, using a spoon, of course. But soup is that kind of food that just gives you this soul satisfaction, like when you're sick, you want soup. When you're trying to help and nourish other people, you go by their house and bring a pot of soup. So nourish yourself first right now, and then share with the rest of the people that you care about. That makes a big difference. So it says to cook this for 20 minutes. And once that's done cooking, then we want to add the wild rice, which I will spend just a few minutes talking about while we're letting it cook. So this has to be pre-cooked. And the reason why is wild rice is not the same as regular rice. It requires 1 cup of dry wild rice, not a blend, just 100%, with 3 cups of water, and it absorbs all that water while it's cooking. Wild rice is actually a grass. It's not a grain. And it's really actually an interesting way, if you know the history of how wild rice is grown. It grows in wetlands, and just have to arrange something real quick. It grows in wetlands, and it was traditionally harvested by canoe. And so they would travel through the marshes and with the canoe and tap and shake on the grasses, and then the seeds would fall off into the bottom of the canoe, and then they would harvest them out of there. That's not always done now in the commercial sense, but it still is the traditional way to grow and collect wild rice. And it's actually considered to be a certified gold standard method of collecting it in a traditional way that practice has held strong throughout the years. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And wild rice is rich because it's a grass. That means it's part of the vegetable family, meaning it has a high phytonutrient content. And phytonutrients are what keep plants healthy, and then when we eat plants, are what keeps us healthy. So phytonutrients are antioxidant-rich colors that add the color to a plant, and then when we eat them, they provide us with antioxidants and prevention against inflammatory disease states. So that's pretty cool when you think about wild rice in that regard. It does have a chewy texture. It is a little stronger, so if you're not used to it, sometimes a good way to introduce it into your diet is to blend it with some other whole grains and slowly bring it in. I'm actually to the point where I just love eating it straight up. It also is a good source of protein. It has fiber, folate, and magnesium. So a nice assortment of necessary nutrients. And another little fun fact about the wild rice is that it's something you can make a wild rice popcorn. So instead of using corn, which again can be very inflammatory for some people, you can take the dry wild rice and put it in a hot skillet with some oil, cover it up, and it will actually pop and become like a puffed rice. And then you can use that as a topping or a little snack to munch on. You could put some seasonings on it once it's been popped. So just a fun little side fact about this fantastic grain, and different ways for you to consider using it, not only just in soup, but you can make a cold salad with it. You can make a batch and then sprinkle it on a green leafy salad. You can use it as a base and adding other vegetables to it, and nuts and seeds, lots of different options. You can even have it as a warm cereal in the morning, where you warm up some of this, maybe slice in some pear and cinnamon, pour a bit of some of your favorite non-dairy milk, and you have essentially like an oatmeal with a whole different nutrient composition. And it is gluten-free for those of you who are eating that way, and that's always a nice option to have. So let me give the soup a stir, and this is looking really nice. I can see my thyme bundle floating around in there, just making everything yummy. And let me shift back really quick to the recipe and make sure I'm not missing anything. Yes, I am. So the next thing that I want to do is, before I add in that, is talk to you about the garnish. And this is flat leaf parsley, and you can certainly buy the curly parsley as well, but this is what's called Italian parsley. And they both have great nutritional benefits, but just nice to have a little variety. And the flat leaf is a little bit softer, it's a little bit kinder. So you can just chop it off at the head if you like, and wait to add that to the last minute, because you don't want it to be overcooked and wilted. It'll lose all of its great nutritional properties. So moving forward, I'm going to add in some fresh lemon juice. This is a key component to the soup and to the flavor. And I've just cut a lemon in half. This is a smaller lemon, and it fits in my citrus squeeze beautifully. And then you get to flex your muscles a bit and squeeze it into the soup. And then reserve the other half, because you might find that you need a little bit more punch once you've added all the ingredients and tasted them together. Okay, I'm just seeing if there's any more questions. Looks like we're good so far. And again, I wanted to reiterate that soup really is an anytime food. You can enjoy it for any meal or as a nice snack. And we don't think of soup as a snack, but it really should be. I mean, anything that you're eating that's made from real whole ingredients is a nourishing way to go about it. And I always ask my folks to think about, if you're looking for a snack, if some real whole food sounds good to you, then you're truly hungry and you do need something. But if none of that sounds good and you're really looking at a box of Triscuits, probably not hungry, and maybe it's just a good time to drop into some stretches or restorative yoga pose, something else to distract you for a bit and see if you're actually needing to eat at that time. Or maybe you just need some water and stay hydrated. I see someone asking about the difference between wild rice and black rice. They're really similar, but black rice is not harvested as a grass. And I don't know exactly the nutritional profile differences, but they certainly both have great value. So it's something you could toggle between. If you found black rice in the store and not wild rice, you could use that in this recipe. I've also seen sushi made with black rice, which I've tried and it's delicious. And then there's also a red rice too. So they're just a little more hearty, different nutrient composition. Anytime you get a different color, you have a different phytonutrient. And that's always fantastic. So you can play around between the wild rice, the black rice, the red rice. Those are all really good. Sometimes the black rice is referred to as forbidden rice. I'm not sure exactly where that came from, but you'll see that on the label as well. So that could be something you'll see. Okay, so as we go along here, I'm going to add now the wild rice. And it calls for a cup in the recipe, and you can decide if you want it to be less or more. Everything is just a suggestion. And you can also do different grains in the soup if you want to make different variations of it over time. But I find that a cup of wild rice is actually perfect. I might have actually put in a little bit more. When you make it, make a big batch and then freeze some of it for later, because you don't need to do that food prep every single time for every ingredient. So I'm going to go ahead and let this keep cooking. And then I'm going to turn up my heat a bit. So the next thing that we're going to do is add the kale. And this, again, you can substitute different greens. You want to use something that is agreeable to the whole family. Kale is sometimes a caution for people who have thyroid problems, because it's a goiter or goitrogen containing food, not a goiter, goitrogen containing. And that's okay if you are careful with cooking it. People with hypothyroid, I ask to not have raw kale consistently, but it's okay if you want to steam it or cook it. So this is a good way to use it in this option. This is the lacinato kale, or the dinosaur kale. And again, there's the curly kale, there's red curly kale, lots of varieties out there. I just decided to go ahead and use this one because I really enjoy the deep emerald color, and I know it will hold that color in the soup. So I'm just gonna take some tongs and gently add it into the water. And it calls for 4 cups. And remember that it's gonna take up a lot of space initially, and then it's gonna shrink down. So this is actually one whole bunch of kale that I cut up. And I'm gonna use the whole thing because I know that it's going to shrink and lose its water content, and then add a tremendous amount of nutritional value to the soup. So it's added in here, and I'm keeping that thyme bundle in for right now, but we will want to take that out obviously at the end of the cooking cycle, and not serve that to a guest in their bowl. So I'm just making sure all of the kale is in the broth and letting it simmer. And here we go again. For those of you, if you can see the soup, and it's really coming along nicely. And remember, if you can't do mushrooms or you can't do carrots, you can always substitute other things. There's such a plethora of information out there, and how to supplement and substitute. Okay, so this is really coming along nicely. It's turning nice and brilliant green. Any of you cooking along, hopefully you're finding the same thing is happening. And I'm just looking for that thyme bundle right now to pull it out. Here we go. Ta-da! So carefully, using your tongs, not your precious fingers, grab the bundle and just move it to the side. And you let your soup keep cooking. Then the last thing that we have to add is the umami. And so at this point, you have all your veggies are nicely sauteed and seasoned. The flavors are blended, and keep in mind the soup's going to get better and better as you go. It's going to sit and blend and become more rich and more flavorful. So here I'm just going to shake this up, and then I'm popping off the lid. And this is that mixture of miso, cashews, non-dairy milk, and some white beans. Really smells great. I wish I could share the smell vision with you all. But here we go. This is the amount that came out of the blender. And I'm just adding this in. This is the creamy part of the soup where we're non-dairy, so we're not using any sort of cow milk product, but we're adding some thickness and some creaminess into the soup. And then stirring it all in. And then you can let this simmer for a few more minutes on a nice even temperature. And voila, you have your soup. And then the last thing that you'll want to do is garnish it, and that's with that fresh parsley. So I've chopped this up into a fine chop, and then you can put it on at the very end and add it to your bowl soup. Some people will put some red pepper flakes on as well if you like a little kick in your meal. So let me show you one more time. You can see how that has come about. And this is a big soup pot, so this is going to serve, depends on if you want it to be a meal or part of a meal, but easily 4 people, maybe 5 or 6, depending on what you're doing with it. And like I said, you can always add other food to it to make it a little bit different. If you want to add some cooked chicken, if you wanted to add maybe even little turkey meatballs or something like that, you could play around with it that way if you wanted to do something along those lines. But keep in mind that the more the merrier, and you might even have a bigger soup pot and want to make double the batch and then freeze part of it. So you don't have all these ingredients in preparation every single time. So with that being said, we've got our recipe. It's time to get the bowls and rally up the troops and get everybody a chance to taste, and just in time for lunch. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And you can find the recipe on the Lifescape blog, along with lots of other recipes and videos in a wide variety of topics from all different providers that work here. And know that we are here to support you and other people in the community with a holistic perspective. We're using food as medicine for your best opportunity. So feel free to share this video if you'd like to. It is being recorded. And tune in next time to the next Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives, and we'll continue exploring the translation of science into art. Until then, be well.